want to start by recapping. You know, yesterday I went through a list of all the reasons why the Republican Party should be defunded. You know, how just incredibly, insanely, mind-bogglingly destructive the Republican Party has become. And not just to average working people. I mean, you know, that's always been their crusade, to make America safe for billionaires and giant corporations. To hell with the average working person. That's kind of the Republican motto, and has been since 1920, when Warren Harding was elected on a campaign slogan of, more business in government, less government in business. In other words, more business in government, privatize, less government and business, deregulate. So, in 1920, Warren Harding became president, Republican Warren Harding, on the slogan of privatize and deregulate, and they're still trying to do it, right? I mean, this whole effort to kneecap the post office, for example, which has been a multi-year process, by the way. It wasn't just something Trump came up with at the last minute to try and win the election. That was the cherry on the top. That was the icing on the cake. That was, that probably caused them to put things into overdrive. But this campaign to kneecap the post office is all about damaging Americans' confidence in the post office, so that we will say, yeah, it doesn't work very well. We should turn it over to one of those really efficient giant corporations. And then we can all get screwed by the new, improved, privatized post office, the way we are by other big giant corporate monopolies. So anyhow, it's this is what the Republican Party, among other things, has frankly always been about. It's always been the party of the very wealthy, and unashamedly so, unabashedly so. Although they did, during the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, they did embrace moderation. Those of you old enough to remember, or those of you young enough to read history books, will know that in 1964, in 1964, at the Republican National Convention, Nelson Rockefeller got up and gave a Republican, later Jerry Ford's vice president. Nelson Rockefeller got up and gave a speech in which he said, essentially, the Republican Party should not embrace extremism. The Republican Party should not just be the party of billionaires like me, is essentially what Nelson Rockefeller said. He said, we need to be the party of all Americans, and we need to embrace moderation. And he was booed off the stage. It's been a few years, it's probably been 10 years, since I did a deep dive on that particular day. I've got the audio around here someplace of that speech, and I've played it on the air. And so after Nelson Rockefeller got booed off the stage, Barry Goldwater got on the stage and said radicalism, or extremism was the word I believe he used, in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation, and I forget the phrase he used, but it was sort of, in the defense of wishy-washiness, or words to that effect, is no virtue. And the crowd went wild. Yes, extremism. We love extremism. Barry Goldwater for president. And he went from there to the nomination, and from there to only winning, one or two states in the election. Yeah. So this is, this is the Republican Party, and that was when the Republican Party began to take the turn. They finished that turn in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan. And, and Reagan really did this. I mean, I was, after the show yesterday, I was going through the whole history of PATCO. It took 1 week. It took actually 3 days for Ronald Reagan to destroy the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, PATCO. In the first week of August of 1981, it was like his eighth month in office, seventh month in office, however you do your math. And he had been looking for an opportunity to destroy the unions because he knew, he had been a former union president, right? Reagan had led a strike with the Screen Actors Guild back in the 1930s, or the 1920s perhaps, I forget when it was, but back in the day, might have been the early 40s, whenever it was. And by the time Reagan was done, by the time Herbert Walker Bush left office, essentially the end of the Reagan administration in 1992, by that point in time, the number of strikes compared to the number of strikes that were happening in the United States, and keep in mind, strikes withholding labor is basically the only weapon labor has to get better working conditions and better pay. The number of strikes had declined to 2% of what it was when Reagan was running SAG. 2%. So anyhow, Reagan figured in the 80s that the way to defund the Democratic Party was to kill the unions, which he did. We've gone from 1/3 of America being unionized to 6% right now. So how do we defund the Republican Party? How can Democrats turn the tables? Number one, end red state welfare. Kentucky gets $2.41 for every dollar they send to D.C. Make that illegal. Say no state can take more than $1.50 from the federal government per every dollar that they send. And call it welfare reform. Number two, end corporate welfare that gets recycled to Republican politicians, including the $600 billion a year we give fossil fuel billionaires, excuse me, that they then turn into ads for Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. The $1 trillion a year that we give to big pharma insurance companies, like the subsidies for this Medicare Advantage scam that Joe Namath is pitching on TV. Be very careful. Do not sign up for Medicare Advantage. It is a scam. And support for Big Ag, these giant agricultural corporations that have wiped out family farms in America. Number three, end corporate monopolies. Break up the big giants that fund the Republican Party, from tech to airlines to banking to retail. You know, they're screwing us. We pay an extra $5,000 per family per year because of monopolies in the United States. Next, bring back Eisenhower's 91% top tax rate. Our economy was strongest during the 30 years from 1950 to 1980, and our top tax rate was 91%. It dropped down to 74% in 1967. But when Reagan came into office, it was 74%. So bring that back, at least the 74%. And with that money, by the way, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s, we built highways, we built schools, we built hospitals, we put men on the moon. Reagan cut that to 25%. Our infrastructure has been crumbling ever since. And the billionaires that tax cut has produced are pouring money into the GOP. And finally, impose a tax on great wealth. You and I, as homeowners, most Americans, actually, you know, a majority of Americans who own their homes, pay an annual wealth tax. It's called a property tax. Billionaires should pay an annual wealth tax, a property tax, on their money bins.
This is the